A very good evening and welcome to the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna, a very quiet Kunsthistorisches Museum. We've been closed for a little over a week now and we will most likely be closed until the end of November. But this evening, which opened at the end of September. My name is Jasper Sharp. I am the curator at the Museum for Modern and Contemporary Art, one of 4 curators who worked on this exhibition together. We had the head of our picture gallery, Stefan Weppelmann, the head of the education department, Andreas Zimmermann, and our colleague Andreas Kugler from the Theatre Museum. One of the greatest human beings that ever lived, Ludwig van Beethoven. It's the 250th anniversary of his birth this year, and it's a very unusual exhibition for us. We are a museum of fine arts. We are a museum whose collection finishes around 1800, so just when Beethoven was getting going. Having said that, it's fascinating to look at the life of somebody who built their career in another one of the artistic disciplines through the lens of visual arts. And the walkthrough that we will do this evening, I'm not going to interpret the objects so much. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why we chose them and the relationships that they have, some of the architecture, some of the curatorial decisions that went into putting this exhibition together. The first thing to say is we did it extremely quickly. This exhibition was prepared in 1 year, which for a museum of this size and an exhibition of this size is about 3 times the normal speed with which we would work. We'd normally have a good 2.5, 3 years to prepare an exhibition. There are various reasons for this, but this exhibition was done very quickly. That can sometimes be a bad thing, but it can also be a good thing in the sense that the momentum never stops in the preparations. There was a tremendous energy to the project. We had to make decisions quickly. Let's start with the basics. How do you do an exhibition about Beethoven? What we knew we didn't want to do was an exhibition based on facts and information about Beethoven's life. In this year he did this, and this year he did this. You can find this out very easily. You can go onto Wikipedia, you can read a book about his life. So it's less about knowledge transfer and telling people information and facts. It's more about what Beethoven makes you feel. Our starting point as a group of curators was to write down a list of emotions, which is here on the cover of the little exhibition booklet. Beethoven excites, inspires, touches, overwhelms, provokes, amazes. Beethoven Moves, which became the title of the exhibition. So we're working very much on a sort of emotional register in the exhibition. The rooms are less about give me information about this person and his life, and more about what does his music make us feel, and how can we convey those feelings, capture those feelings in the form of certain objects, and with architecture, the process to work on an emotional register, which is a dangerous thing to do, because what for one person is deeply moving is for another can be pathetic. So it's a risky way to approach an exhibition, but Beethoven himself is someone who took risks his entire life. He was uncompromising, unconventional, risk-taking, so we felt right from the get-go that our approach to this exhibition needed to be similarly risk-taking, unconventional, and unexpected, and uncompromising. And we hope that, I hope that you will feel that we've maybe achieved some of that. So let's walk into the exhibition and I can begin to show you some of the rooms. So, for those of you who know our museum, the first thing that you'll notice is that we set out very deliberately to transform the galleries that people know and love into spaces the likes of which they'd never really seen before. We did an architectural competition at the very early stage of the project. We invited, I think, 5 or 6 different architects and designers. We focused specifically on people who had experience not so much with exhibition design and museum projects, but with theatre and opera and stage design. We wanted something unashamedly theatrical, and that's what you're seeing here. So this is the first gallery of the exhibition. It's a towering vertical space created using layers and layers of a white fabric, which is suspended from a steel rig, and they create an almost sacral space in here. Very optimistic space. It's white, light colors, light gray carpet. It's a space of optimism. This is the first gallery of the exhibition. It's loosely chronological, the exhibition, if you like. We conceived it, there are 4 galleries that we're going to see, and we conceived the exhibition very much like 4 movements of a symphony, each of which evokes their own range of emotions. So this first room is dedicated to the piano sonatas of Beethoven. On the wall we have 32 drawings by the German artist Johann de Voigt, one for each of the 32 piano sonatas. So you're instantly setting a certain tone in the room with this work. There are a number of artworks in this exhibition that were made by artists specifically with Beethoven in mind. Johinda's one such example. Idris Khan, a British artist, is another example. He's photographed every page of every piano sonata and superimposed the photographs on top of each other. But then there are a number of other objects in the exhibition, like this piano that's hanging above me, which was not made with Beethoven in mind, but which we've brought into the exhibition almost to represent a moment of Beethoven's life, something to do with his mood and his behavior. This is a very special object. It's made by the German artist Rebecca Horn in 1990. The title is Concert. We're very lucky because that only happens every half an hour, and lots of people stand here all day waiting for that for half an hour, waiting for that to happen. This is a wonderful work. The reason we've hung this here is not simply because it's a piano and Beethoven was a pianist and a composer for the piano, but because this genius of a man was also renowned for his temper tantrums. He would explode in rage sometimes. And rather than just having a beautiful, harmonious, white, lovely, gorgeous, optimistic room, we wanted to have one presence in the room which would disrupt this harmony every so often with a sort of discordant thump and slightly startle people who are in the room who are not expecting it to do this. So this piano spews out its keys every 15 minutes. The piano then gently sways in a somewhat precarious manner, and 15 minutes later it sucks them all back in again and makes this ghastly sound as it pulls them all back in again in reverse. And then it sits quiet, ready to surprise the next visitors in here 15 minutes later. So this is really, if you like, representing a certain element of Beethoven's own temperament. Right across from it, we've paired it with an extraordinary work, the most fragile work in the whole exhibition. This is a work by Auguste Rodin, the great French master, sculptor. This is the first life-size sculpture that Rodin ever made in 1877. It scandalized Parisian society when it was shown at one of the salons for the first time. Why is this here, you might ask? A young man in a somewhat ambiguous pose. Is he defeated? Is he victorious? Is he waking up? Is he... It's all sorts of different emotions are aroused in this sculpture. One thing you'll notice is that Beethoven himself, his face, his profile, his portrait, doesn't appear anywhere in the exhibition. That was a very deliberate choice on our part. We had lots of questions from people. Why isn't he on the invitation card? Why isn't he on the poster? We didn't want to create an exhibition of images of this man. His image is very well known, this wild hair. We wanted instead to have almost surrogates for Beethoven running all the way through the exhibition. So there are certain red lines, if you like, red threads that run all the way through the exhibition. One of them is the single figure, the single isolated human figure. In each gallery we have an example of this, and I'll show you as we go along. This is the example in this room, almost this young genius having this enlightenment, this awakening, if you like, creating this extraordinary body of work, most of which was created after he moved to Vienna. One of the other threads that runs all the way through exhibition is the performative. We have a work by John Baldessari on our staircase, which you need to shout into, and then it plays a string quartet back at you. We have Rebecca's piano. We have a work by Anselm Kiefer in the next gallery, which is performance-based. We have a film in the third gallery that you're going to see in a minute, which is performance-based. And then we finish with an actual piece of performance art in the final gallery. This performative element was so crucial to Beethoven himself during his own lifetime. His music was performed. You couldn't record music at that time. So everything was based on live performance. So this is an element that we wanted to keep in the exhibition ourselves. We also had the lovely opportunity to borrow a number of examples of Beethoven's own music. This is the famous Waldstein Sonata, which we're actually listening to at the moment. We are lucky enough to have Jorinda's own rendering of the Waldstein Sonata together with the original sheet music from the Beethoven house in Bonn, where Beethoven was born 250 years ago. So it's very nice to be able to juxtapose the actual music, listen to it in the room, and then have this rendering of it, this attempt to capture, if you like, the emotion that runs through the music. One last thing in this room that I'd just like to show you is we were slightly undecided where to place this work by Idris Khan. This is a C print of every single page of every piano sonata superimposed and printed on top of each other. And it's called Struggling to Hear for Ludwig van Beethoven. It's a work that Idris made soon after he graduated from the Royal College of Art in London. And of course, it's referring to that moment in Beethoven's life where he began to lose his hearing. You have certain moments of clarity within the work where a single note sticks out and then it's gone again. The second room that we're going to see in a moment is dedicated to this loss of hearing. So if you like, this work we briefly had hanging in that room. We decided in the end to place it in this room almost like an anchor, like a bridge, if you like, to take us through to the second gallery. We also have Beethoven's own voice in the exhibition in the form of quotations from his diaries and his notebooks and his letters. We have them in German and English. They're represented in each gallery in a different way. These ones are projected on with light and they change on a regular basis, the English and then the German translation. The architecture was done by an amazing architectural firm from Amsterdam called Tom Postma. We'd never worked with them before. They came highly recommended to us. And the fascinating thing is, what you're seeing in here is almost exactly what they gave us in their very first sketches as part of the architectural competition. They got the idea right from the beginning. And that was tremendously encouraging for us as curators to work with such open-minded, athletic, courageous architects, because they've radically transformed these galleries. For those of you who do know the Kunsthistorisches well, we have these large old air conditioning units in the middle of each gallery, in the picture gallery, with benches around them where you can fall asleep and spend a wonderful day when you're tired of looking at pictures. And underneath these white circular discs are our air conditioning units. So they've got a sort of new skin for this exhibition, because they're big, lumpy, cumbersome things, and it's always a little bit of a problem to know what to do with them when you're using the gallery for exhibitions. So we're going to walk through to the second gallery. One thing we had to try and do in the second gallery was keep it deathly still and silent. So we worked with a wonderful acoustic engineer to create a sound tunnel, which is what we're now walking through, which is covered with sound deadening foam, and it's got a little bit of a 90-degree turn in it to help with the killing of the sound. And we're here in the second gallery of the exhibition, which has a completely different atmosphere, deliberately so. It's very dark. It's very quiet, and the room is dominated by a huge stage in the middle of the room, which is also covering up two of those large air conditioning units. And on top of this stage is a wooden floor, and it's composed of various square elements. It looks like 1,000 wooden floors from apartments here in Vienna, historical apartments. But this, in fact, is the wooden floor from the very last apartment in which Ludwig van Beethoven lived, and in fact, the apartment in which he died. And this gallery, the second gallery of the exhibition, is dedicated to this moment in Beethoven's life when he was around 28 years old, when he realized that he was dense. His hearing must have been absolutely catastrophic for a composer to suffer this gradual decline. He went deaf between the age of 28 and worked and lived for another 13 years after that. And we decided to curate a room which would be dark and claustrophobic and give this sense of deathly silence. It's a room about deafness without ever really talking about deafness. And what we've done in this room, the two main features of this room are the wooden floor and these prints that you see on the wall by the Spanish master Goya. And these are borrowed from the collection of the Albertina here in Vienna. They belong to a portfolio called Los Caprichos. There are 80 of them in total. Goya himself, he lived at the same time as Beethoven. He was born a little earlier, he died a little later. And Goya himself also, one of Goya's responses to this deafness, they're a series of quite biting, withering, acidic comments on certain people, lawyers, doctors, artists, prostitutes. There's a self-portrait, one of the most famous. So we decided to bring in these historical works by another great master as his response to this predicament of losing his own hearing. This was his response to it. We asked the Albertina if we could frame them with black passepartouts, effect that we wanted in this room. They're hung on these wonderful kind of black sheetrock walls. Again, quite unlike anything we've ever done really at the museum before. We have one of Beethoven's ear trumpets. I mentioned in the previous gallery that we are introducing Beethoven's voice into the exhibition. Laser cut into the wall at the very beginning of this room, we have the famous Heiligenstädter Testament, which is a dreadfully sad, let's walk over and see it, I can show it to you, a dreadfully sad text, a letter that Beethoven wrote, despair at losing his hearing and how it was affecting his life and his mood and how he didn't know how he could go on. So this text is written, this was found, a manuscript with this text was found in Beethoven's possessions in this apartment after he died, and it was posthumously published. And we've printed this here to help to convey exactly what it was he was feeling. We can show you here 6 photographs of this apartment in the Schwarz-Spanier-Straße in Vienna where Beethoven died. It was his 67th apartment in Vienna. He moved house very, very often. Supposedly it's to do with his inability to pay his rent on time, that he was moving around so quickly. But these relatively uninteresting photographs actually become fascinating, haunting photographs when you realize that what they are. This is exactly the state in which he left this apartment. The building was torn down in 1903. Before it was torn down, a group of concerned citizens got together and salvaged everything they could from the apartment. So the floors, the doors, the door frames. We knew that they were somewhere in Vienna. And Andreas Kugler, part of our curatorial team, tracked them down, these wooden floorboards. He tracked them down to the storage of the Wien Museum, which is the museum of the city of Vienna. They said, yes, indeed, we have these in our storage. They've never been shown since they were taken up from the floor of Beethoven's apartment. Together with the Wien Museum, we engaged them in a conservation project to restore a section of the floor to enable us to show it. We deliberately kept it as a blank floor because we were interested in the idea of it being a type of stage. Beethoven, since he died, has become all things to all people. He's become a commercial object. He's become the anthem of the European Union. He was beloved by Mao Zedong, by Lenin, by Hitler. He's been appropriated by fascists. He's been celebrated as a voice of peace. He's really become everything. And this empty stage almost symbolizes this willful manipulation of Beethoven and his legacy after his death. I can show you a couple of other objects down here. I'm not very good at reading music, I have to confess, but those of you who are will recognize this as being the introduction to the Fifth Symphony, one of the most famous pieces. And you're very aware when we see our visitors coming in here whether people can read music or not. Because object, if they can read music, they're engrossed in it. And they spend a lot of time here. We also poison, if you like, into the exhibition. Beethoven, as we say, has had something of his music was performed every year. As I mentioned, Mao Zedong, of Lenin. Some of you will know the film The Clockwork. We were thinking for a long time, how could we introduce the element into the exhibition? Anselm Kiefer in Edinburgh. And what we see is a self-portrait of a very young Anselm Kiefer. The photograph was taken in 1970. Kiefer traveled all around the world to places wars. He's standing here in one of the temples in Paestum in southern Italy, and he's giving today in Austria. So he has the night sky painted above him, splattered with paint. He's painted a palette where his heart is a handwritten script, which is something you often find in Anselm Kiefer's work. Philosopher Immanuel Kant, the English translation of which is "the starry heavens above us and the moral law within." And when we found this, Andreas Kugler, one of our curators, was immediately struck by this quotation because he recognized it from one of Beethoven's own notebooks, from one of his journals. This was a quotation from Kant that Beethoven was familiar with and which meant a great deal to him. So we were delighted to find this work. Tate very kindly agreed to lend it. So it's doing several things in here. It's contributing to this dark, introduce this element of poison, and it's also brought us this wonderful philosophical statement which Beethoven himself was very interested in. So we have a quiet second room. Some people find this room very empty. We get a few notes, but it's about creating a mood. Some people are baffled that we would choose an empty wooden floor. Other people, I've walked around this room several times and found people in tears in this room. It has very different effects on people. Again, maintaining this theatrical feel, this, if you like, the second movement of the symphony that is this exhibition. We're now going to walk through another sound. We have sound again. So we're in a little bit of a lighter gallery here again. We have a blue fabric on the wall. We have a mirrored floor. We have some wonderful paintings, drawings, music. But I'm actually going to begin with the film that you might be able to hear. This was the first object that we decided to install in this room. And the idea of this room is really to illustrate how Beethoven overcame this terrible hindrance of his deafness. In the last 13 years of Beethoven's life, when he was almost completely deaf, he composed some of the most remarkable music of his entire career. So we chose this artwork. Again, this is not an artwork that was made with Beethoven in mind, but we asked the artist, Guido van der Werve, a young Dutch artist who lives and works in Berlin. He made this work a number of years ago. It is a self-portrait of Guido walking along a frozen sea, the Gulf of Finland. And he's walking along the ice, and behind him, around 30 yards behind him, is a huge towering icebreaker. You might just be able to hear it on the film, crashing through the ice. And for us, it was a fantastic metaphor, a visual metaphor for this isolated man, Beethoven, who through his inability to hear was cut off from the world, but persevering, finding his way out of this frozen sea and soldiering on and breaking through. The film has a certain absurdist element to it. The title of the film is Number 8, Everything is Going to Be All Right. When you know the name of the film, you stop worrying that something terrible is about to happen to this chap. But we really wanted to have it here as a sense. I mentioned that single figure that runs through the exhibition. We had Rodin in the first room, we had Kiefer in the second room, we have the single figure here. We also have the single figure appearing in some works. We have two amazing corners of very contrasting landscapes here. I'm actually going to begin over in the corner where we enter the exhibition with a British artist, Turner, one of my heroes. I've been dreaming for about 20 years to bring the sketchbooks of Turner into an exhibition, and this felt like an ideal opportunity. What we've done here is we've shown 3 sketchbooks by Turner, a very small sketchbook full of skies, different depictions of the sky, mainly in England, but also some Italian skies, some French skies, very quick, impromptu, spontaneous watercolors. We have another sketchbook sitting next to it of seas and storms and the coastline in the south of England. You can see a lighthouse in the middle of a storm. These are very spontaneous drawings, watercolors by Turner, created en plein air, on site, at the beach, on the coast, in a ship, lying on Hampstead Heath, looking up at the clouds. We've got a wonderful series of depictions of a fire at the Tower of London, which Turner himself saw and witnessed with his own eyes. Extraordinary work. This is 1841. This is really the beginning of abstraction happening right here before our eyes. And what we wanted to show with these works, these extremely expressive, quick, fiery, energetic works by Turner, we've juxtaposed them with some of Beethoven's own very first compositions, where the idea of a melody comes into his head and he hurriedly scribbles down a line of music or 2 lines of music to show the birth of an idea, this explosive moment where an idea finds its way out of somebody's mind and imagination and creative soul. So we've put these 2 things together, visual arts on the one hand, music on the other, and it's extraordinary to see the kinship between them. We're also juxtaposing this very loose, fluid, expressive work of Turner with landscapes that are evoking very similar emotions, but which are produced in a very, very different way. This is a German artist, Caspar David Friedrich. He's generally considered almost to be an old master these days, but for us as a historical museum, he's a relatively modern artist. We don't have anything this recent in our own collection. So these works were borrowed from the Belvedere here in Vienna, from museums in Munich, Weimar, Hamburg. And compared to Turner, these are very precise, forensically put together works, almost quite pedantic. And you can see what's fascinating in a museum like ours is you can see that an artist like Turner comes very much out of the tradition of an artist like Rubens, very powerful and robust and expressive. And Caspar David Friedrich is very much coming out of the tradition of an artist like Dürer, almost painting with a scalpel and a very fine brush, almost photographic in how he's portraying. The reason we wanted to have both of these artists with Beethoven is they all lived at pretty much the same time. They were all fascinated by nature, the power of nature, both in a very positive sense, the sublime quality of nature in the landscape, but also nature as a terrifying, overwhelming force that made human beings suddenly feel tiny and vulnerable and very weak in comparison. Their ideas and their thoughts and their writings are almost interchangeable. If you read a letter or a text of Friedrich, you could be reading something written by Beethoven, Turner likewise, but the end result that they all produce is really quite different. And we love the idea of listening to one of Beethoven's great symphonies, looking at Friedrich, looking at Turner, and almost putting these various ideas together. One other idea we had in this room, we asked ourselves for a long time, how can we show music in quite a dynamic sense? And of course, music, writing music, is a very expressive act, but it's also got a certain mathematical quality to it. I'm not somebody that writes music. I have no idea how somebody would write a symphony and find a way to put all the parts, the different instrumental orchestral parts together to create this whole. And we wanted in this exhibition to also show how complicated it is to do this. So on the wall over here we have the very beginning of Egmont, one of Beethoven's most celebrated pieces of music, with different orchestral parts lined up on the wall, almost like a piece of conceptual art, a piece of contemporary art, where you see all the different orchestral parts and you can follow them along and see how they almost dovetail with each other. And it's a way of saying, yes, there are these ideas, the inspiration of nature, the expressive force of music, the melody, but at the end of the day, you've also still got to do this extremely complicated process of layering and almost like creating an onion in reverse, where you have to have all these layers sort of come on top of each other. So that was really an attempt to do this. It's lovely how the music also finds itself reflected in the mirrored floor. This room is probably, for us as curators, the hardest room to do, because it's almost like 3 different mini exhibitions within this gallery. Just alone, this selection of 7 works by Caspar David Friedrich is a type of mini exhibition within the room. So this room is a little more fragmented, I would say, than the first 2 galleries, which had very clear, they were sort of tableaus, if you like. Here we're in a bit more of a classic group exhibition situation. We also borrowed this stunning painting of Prometheus, one of the great mythical figures from history, the man who brought fire to mankind, the liberator of mankind, punished by Zeus, the god, for doing so. Beethoven was often compared to Prometheus during his life, and it was an idea because also we have the music from the ballet, the overture Prometheus by Beethoven, to find a depiction of Prometheus. Amazingly, given our huge picture gallery, we actually don't have a depiction of Prometheus in our entire collection. So we borrowed this one from the Prado in Madrid. It's actually a copy of a Rubens painting of Prometheus, which is now lost. The Prado have the oil sketch by Rubens, which is extraordinary. And this copy by someone who lived, a contemporary of Rubens, Jan Kosiers. We asked them if we could possibly show this painting without glass and without a barrier, as long as we hung it up high to keep it away from young children, potential accidents. So they said yes, which is great. So that's why it's thrown up. Also because of the image you're looking at, it functions quite well when it's hung at a certain height. So in here we've got this competing sound of an icebreaker and a symphony. It's deliberately quite disturbing, this combination, because we wanted to really symbolize this emphatic breakthrough and this triumphant music. So as you walk around the room, you hear different music in different corners of the gallery. And again, around the very top of the room, a wonderful quote by Beethoven, "No man can love the countryside more than I do," about his love of nature. So we have, if you like, a watery floor. We have fire, we have ice, we have landscapes. We have the blue fabric almost for the sky. We've tried to create this whole sort of environment, if you like, in this gallery, again using fabric. And here we reveal the great air conditioning units that I've talked about in each of the previous galleries with their benches. Finally, our visitors in the third room actually get somewhere to sit down. And it's lovely to see people spending time in here, listening to the music, watching the film, reading the little booklet, taking a break, before they go on to the fourth gallery, which is where we're going to head right now. The fourth and final room in the exhibition. I'm going to go through the last sound tunnel. The quietest, emptiest room in the entire museum. We've never mounted an exhibition in this museum with an entirely empty room. The pictures are gone, the barriers are gone, all the signage is gone. And the reason this exhibition, to commission a number of new works for this exhibition. Beethoven himself, during his lifetime, lived from commissions from the Count Razumovsky, from the Count Lobkowitz. He was fortunate enough to have lots of aristocratic patrons who enabled him to work and produce the wonderful music that he did. So we wanted, just as we wanted to continue we also wanted to continue this process of commissioning. So the very first work that you see when you arrive at the museum, outside on our facade, is a brand new commission by the Turkish artist Ayşe Erkman, a sound work. And the very last work you see in the exhibition would normally be in this room. We decided we wanted to commission arguably the most remarkable artist who works with performance, live performance, situations. His name is Tino Sehgal. He's a German artist, lives in Berlin. He studied philosophy and dance, which I think is the most fantastic combination of things you could possibly study. And Tino has been working for a number of years now, 20 years, with the notion of live interactive works. They're almost never documented. So were Tino's performers to be in here now doing what they normally do, we wouldn't be filming in here. We commissioned Tino to create a new work about Beethoven. He replied to us immediately to say he's never done a commissioned work in his life. He generally doesn't do commissions. But he admitted that he'd been listening to Beethoven non-stop for about 3 months when we called him. He didn't really know why, but as soon as we called him, he knew why. And he said in one of our first conversations, Beethoven is someone who fascinates me. He's somewhere between Jesus and Karl Marx. He's one of those transformative individuals. The world was a different place after this person lived. So he set about thinking up a new work for this exhibition. And if you come and visit us in December or January, when hopefully this exhibition will be open again, you'll find in this room, every moment of the day, every minute of the day that the exhibition is open, 1 or 2 people dressed like everybody else in the museum, relatively normally, standing in our space on the floor, sitting on a sofa. And Tino has taken 6 pieces of music by Beethoven, 6 of his most iconic pieces of music, symphony, piano sonata, string quartet, and rearranged them for the human voice. Pieces which are not intended to be sung are being sung by these dancers and singers. For each of the 6 pieces of music, a different part of their body dances. Sometimes it's just their face, sometimes it's one hand, sometimes it's the shoulders. With the Ninth Symphony, it's the entire body. And you come in, there's very little signage to tell you, there's no label anywhere to tell you what's going on. And you come and sit down and you hear something you've never heard before. You recognize something, but it's being delivered in a form to which you're quite unaccustomed. And it's really an extraordinarily moving, delicate, tender, beautiful finale to the exhibition. Literally, these emotions, this register of emotions that I mentioned at the very beginning, which you felt all the way through the exhibition, from this optimistic young genius, through this dark, despairing moment of the deafness, through to this triumphant, towering breakthrough at the end of his life with these grand symphonies, reaches this kind of apotheosis at the end of the exhibition where these emotions appear to just come directly out of these wonderful performers, actors, people, with the sound of their voice and their body. I've watched it probably for about 10 hours now over the last few weeks. It's different every time I see it. Everyone's interpretation is slightly different. The work is developing each week into something slightly different. It's absolutely fascinating. So I hope you have the chance to come and see it. As I say, it's a beautiful opportunity to see the work of Tino Sehgal here in Vienna. And we're delighted that he accepted our proposition to be part of this exhibition. And then you leave and you step back almost 300 years in time and find yourself back in the collection of the picture gallery with our old masters. So that's the very end of the exhibition, the dark wall at the end. Tino deliberately wanted to keep this room completely empty. We put soundproofing, we blocked all the entrances, so there's no sort of distractions in here. We laid a carpet to get rid of the famous creak of the wooden floors of the Kunsthistorisches. We left the sofas here, and some people spend 2 minutes in here. They can't fathom what's going on. Other people spend 3 hours and come back again the next day and back again the next day. It's got something wonderfully addictive to it. So it was a great thrill for us to be able to work with a number of living artists, Guido, Kiefer, Rebecca Horn, Jorinda, Idris, Aisha, Tino in this exhibition, and also bring the work of a number of great old masters as well. I understand we have the chance to answer a few questions now for a few minutes. If any of you do have specific questions about the exhibition, specific objects, our thoughts behind certain decisions, if you'd like to tell us what you like, what you don't like, now's your opportunity to fire something into the Instagram Live machine, and Christina, who's filming me here, will be able to pass on any questions you might have.
So why did you choose to do this exhibition on Beethoven?
Why did we choose to do this exhibition on Beethoven? It's a very good question, actually. We were asked to do this exhibition by the museum. We are the most important museum in Vienna, and it's Beethoven's 250th anniversary. So it was felt that somebody needed to step up and do a serious exhibition about Beethoven in the city this year. To be completely honest, I spent about the first 6 months trying to persuade the museum that this actually wasn't the exhibition we needed to be doing. We were very unsure about Beethoven in this museum. But when we came round to the idea that actually we don't need to tell the story of his life, we could actually do something a little more intuitive, a little more mood-based, we began to get very excited about the idea. So we have something like 5,000 years of objects in this museum, which run right up until the moment that Beethoven was born. So when we came to see the museum almost like a pedestal on which Beethoven stood, everything we have in our museum is what he was breaking with, what he was taking a huge step away from, modernizing. So it's almost as if you see our combined collections of antiquities, objects, paintings, as almost everything that Beethoven was taken as the given, and this is where I'm going to go with it. So when we began to sort of come around to this way of thinking, we found it a tremendously exciting proposition.
Are there any exhibitions planned
Are there any other exhibitions planned on other composers? Not that I know of. There are a lot of other Beethoven exhibitions to see at the moment. There's the wonderful Beethoven House in Heiligenstadt. There's an exhibition in Baden, just outside Vienna. The National Library in Vienna has an exhibition about Beethoven. So there's dozens of Beethoven exhibitions and performances to see. I think we're really just concentrating on Ludwig this year. Will the museum one day in the future do another exhibition about a composer? Your guess is as good as mine, I think.
You were 3 different curators who brought what to the exhibition?
We were 4 different curators. What did we bring differently to the exhibition? It's a very good question. 2 of the curators were Beethoven experts. 2 others were not. And that was also interesting because often, almost always, exhibitions are curated by complete experts on the subject. You hope they're experts on the subject because you're asking them to tell you something. In this exhibition, it was actually very interesting to have, I think, somebody like myself who knew a bit about Beethoven, but not a great deal, who almost represented the public, the general public, in the conception of the exhibition. I represented the non-experts. How can we stop this from becoming too lost in detail, in expertise about Beethoven? How can we zoom the lens back and create an exhibition about a remarkable person in a manner that is as open and accessible to children, older people, people who speak different languages, people who are experts on Beethoven who are not. We've had famous conductors through here, musicians who found it fascinating. We had people who've been through here. The only thing they knew about Beethoven was the fact that he went deaf. That was the only thing they knew, who also found something interesting. So it was very good on the team to have someone from the field of visual arts, someone from the world of contemporary art, someone from the theatre museum, someone from the education department to tie. We'd never worked together, the 4 of us, directly on an exhibition, but it was actually a fantastic experience for all of us to do it together.
When are we going to be allowed to visit museums again? Any news on that?
When are we going to be allowed to visit museums again? That is the $6 million question. I hope that it will be very early in December. We all hope. We have to see how things go. Either way, the Kunsthistorisches will always be here. We will be coming to you as much as we can over the next weeks with things like this. We have another talk next week, a collaboration with Frieze magazine, where we're exploring the work of female artists in our collection, not something that the Kunsthistorisches and museums like ours are particularly known for, but we have a few extraordinary women, historical women artists tucked away in the collection. We'll be talking about them next week. So until we are allowed to physically receive you again, we will be beaming our way into your sitting rooms and kitchens and dining rooms and bedrooms. I hope that we will get back into museums as soon as possible because particularly at times when the world is a wobbly place and we all feel a little uncertain and raw and unnerved, a place like a museum, certainly a museum that you know, to go and visit old friends, to stand, for example, in our gallery of Rembrandt paintings at the moment, of his self-portraits, is a tremendously... I was in there the other day. It has a completely different feel for me now than it did 6 months ago. It's a place of solace, of strength, of quiet, of feeling secure again. So I hope very much that museums will be able to open their doors again very soon, all over the world. I think we're done. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. And as I say, join us next week. We have a talk on the 19th of November with Frieze magazine, and plenty of more things to come after that. So I wish you all a very good evening and goodbye from the Kunsthistorisches Museum.